The topic we are discussing today is theoretical perspectives in social psychology. The objectives of this module are: after reading this chapter, you will be able to answer the following questions. What is the cognitive perspective of social psychology? What is symbolic interaction theory? What is evolutionary theory? And finally, we will compare the theoretical perspectives that have been discussed so far. Another theoretical perspective in social psychology is cognitive theory. The basic premise of cognitive theory is that the mental activities of the individual are important determinants in social behavior. These mental activities, called cognitive processes, include perception, memory, judgment, problem solving, and decision making. Cognitive theory does not deny the importance of external stimuli, but it maintains that the link between the stimulus and response is not mechanical or automatic. Rather, the individual's cognitive processes intervene between external stimuli and behavioral responses. Individuals not only actively interpret the meaning of stimuli, but also select the actions to be made in response. Historically, the cognitive approach to social psychology has been influenced by the ideas of Kafka, Kohler, and other theorists in the Gestalt movement of psychology. Central to the Gestalt psychology is the principle that people respond to configurations of stimuli rather than to a single discrete stimulus. In other words, people understand the meaning of a stimulus only by viewing it in the context of an entire system of elements, that is the Gestalt, in which it is embedded. For example, a chess master would not assess the importance of a chess piece on the board without considering its location and strategic capabilities in relation to all the other pieces currently on the board. To comprehend the meaning of any element, we must look at the whole of which it is a part of. Modern cognitive theorists depict humans as active in selecting and interpreting stimuli. According to this view, people do more than to react to their environment, they actively structure their world cognitively. First, because they cannot possibly attend to all the complex stimuli that surround them. They select only those stimulus that are important and are useful to them and ignore all the others. Second, they actively control which categories or concepts they use to interpret the stimuli in the environment. One implication, of course, is that several individuals can form different impressions of the same complex stimulus in the environment. Consider, for example, what happens when several people view a vacant house displaying a bright "For Rent" sign. When a building contractor passes the house, he pays primary attention to the quality of the house's construction. He sees the bricks, windows, glass, and some repairs that need to be made. Another person, for example, a potential renter, sees the house very differently. He notes that it is located close to his work and wonders whether the surroundings are safe. The real estate person trying to rent out the house understands it in still different terms, in terms of cash flow and occupancy rate. One of the preschool kids living in the same area has yet another different view. Observing that no person had lived in the house for several months, he is convinced that the house is haunted. Therefore, several individuals can form different impressions of the same complex stimulus in the environment. Central to the cognitive perspective is the concept of cognitive structure. So, what is this cognitive structure? It refers broadly to any form of organization among cognitions or thoughts like concepts and beliefs. Because a person's cognitions are interrelated, cognitive theory gives emphasis to exactly how thoughts are structured and organized in memory and how they affect a person's judgments. Social psychologists have proposed that individuals use specific cognitive structures called schemas. Schemas are cognitive structures or frameworks that are used to make sense of complex information about other persons, groups, and situations. The term schema is derived from the Greek word for form, and it refers to the form or basic sketch of what we know about people and things. For example, our schema for engineering student might be a set of traits thought to characterize that person, such as intelligent, analytic, logical, creative, who has an eye for details, strategically skillful in interpersonal relations, and imaginative. This schema no doubt reflects our own experience with engineers as well as our conception of traits that are necessary for success in that profession. Just because we have this sketch or schema of an engineering student does not mean that we believe that everyone with this set of characteristics is an engineering student, or that every engineering student will have all of these characteristics. We might be surprised, however, if we meet someone who is illogical, withdrawn, inarticulate, inattentive, and sloppy, and not very intelligent, and later discovered that he was an engineering student. Therefore, schemas are important in social relations because they help us in interpreting the environment efficiently. Whenever we encounter a person for the first time, we usually form an impression of what he or she is like. In doing this, we not only observe the person's behavior but also rely on our knowledge of similar persons that we have met in the past. That is, we use our schema or sketch regarding this type of a person. Schemas help us process information by enabling us to recognize which personal characteristics are important in the interaction and which are not. Schemas structure and organize information about the person, and they help us remember information better and process it more quickly. Sometimes they fill gaps in knowledge and help us to make inferences and judgments about others. To illustrate further, consider a university professor conducting interviews for candidates to admit them as students, say for a PG course in psychology. To assist in processing applications, the officer uses a schema for potential candidate that is based on traits believed to predict success in the specific course and beyond. The professor pays close attention to the score the candidate secured in the undergraduate score in both theory and practical papers, whereas the candidate's ability in playing cricket does not matter in the decision-making process here. So schemas rarely function as predictive devices, and the professor probably will make mistakes admitting some candidates who may not complete the PG course in psychology and turning down some candidates who would have succeeded. Moreover, another professor with a different schema might admit different set of students to the course. Schemas also figure centrally in our stereotypes and discriminatory attitudes. Consider the same example. If the professor has a particular schema and recruits only students belonging to the general category, he or she may not give the admission to those who are belonging to SC or BC category. Despite their drawbacks, schemas are more efficient ways to process social information than having no systematic framework at all. Thus, they persist as important cognitive mechanisms even when they are not perfect. Therefore, finally, we can say that schemas help in the following manner. They help us to make sense of complex information about other persons, groups, and situations. They interpret the environment efficiently. They figure centrally in our stereotypes and discriminatory attitudes, but they rarely function as predictive devices. One way to study cognitive structure is to observe changes that occur in a person's cognitions when they are under challenge or attack. The changes that occur in a person's cognitions when they are under challenge or attack will reveal facts about the underlying structure or organization in his or her cognitions. An important idea emerging from this approach is the principle of cognitive consistency. The principle of cognitive consistency maintains that individuals strive to hold ideas that are consistent or congruent with one another rather than ideas that are inconsistent or incongruent. If a person holds several ideas that are incongruent, then he or she will experience internal conflict. In reaction, he or she will likely to change one or more ideas, thereby making them consistent and resolving the conflict. For example, suppose you hold the following cognitions about your friend Vikram. Vikram has been a good friend for 6 years, and you dislike alcohol and the people who use them. Thirdly, Vikram has recently started using alcohol. These cognitions are obviously interrelated, but they are not congruent with one another. The principle of cognitive consistency predicts that a change will occur in cognition. That is, you will change either your negative attitude towards alcohol or your positive attitude towards Vikram, or possibly you will intervene and try to change Vikram's behavior. Based on this principle of cognitive consistency, the balance theory and the theory of cognitive dissonance were developed. Cognitive theory has made many important contributions to social psychology. It addresses such diverse phenomena as self-concept, perception of persons, and attribution of causes, attitude change, impression management, and group stereotypes. In these contexts, cognitive theory has produced many insights and striking predictions regarding individual and social behavior. Limitations of cognitive theory. One drawback of cognitive theory is that it simplifies and sometimes oversimplifies the way in which people process information, an inherently complex phenomenon. Another drawback is that cognitive phenomena are not directly observable. They must be inferred from what people say and do. This means that compelling and definitive tests of theoretical predictions from the cognitive theory are sometimes difficult to conduct. However, the cognitive perspective is among the more popular and productive approaches in social psychology. A fourth perspective in social psychology is symbolic interaction theory. Like the cognitive perspective, symbolic interactionism stresses cognitive processes such as thinking and reasoning, but it places much more emphasis on the interaction between the individual and the society. The basic premise of symbolic interactionism is that human nature and social order are products of symbolic communication among people. According to this perspective, a person's behavior is constructed through give and take during his or her interaction with others. Behavior is not merely a response to stimuli, nor is it merely an expression of inner biological drives, profit maximization, or conformity to roles and norms. Rather, a person's behavior emerges continually through communication and interaction with others. How do people negotiate meanings? People can communicate successfully with one another only to the extent that they attribute similar meanings to objects. An object's meaning for a person depends not so much on the properties of the objects itself, but on what the person might do with the object. In other words, an object takes on meaning only in relation to person's plans. For example, a wine merchant might see a glass bottle as a container for his product. An interior designer might see it as an attractive vase for some flowers. A drunken man in a fight might see it as a weapon with which to hit his opponent. Symbolic interaction theory views humans as proactive and goal-seeking. People formulate plans of actions to achieve their goals. Many plans can be accomplished only through cooperation with other people. To establish cooperation with others, the meaning of things must be shared and consensual. If the meaning of something is unclear, an agreement must be developed through give and take before cooperative action is possible. For example, for a company to make progress, the goal must be clear and mutual between the management and the employees. and also there should be cooperation among employees. Symbolic interactionism portrays social interaction as having a tentative developing quality. To fit their actions together and achieve consensus, people interacting with one another must continually negotiate new meanings or reaffirm old meanings. Each person formulates plans for actions, tries them out and then adjusts them in the light of others' responses. Thus, social interaction always has some degree of unpredictability. The self in relationship to others. The main point of social interaction is the process of role-taking in which an individual imagines how he or she looks from the other person's viewpoint. For example, if you wanted to ask your father to increase your pocket money, first you will imagine different ways of approaching him and his subsequent reaction. To do this, you will recall what worked in the past or what you have heard from your elder brother. By imagining your request from your father's viewpoint, you will be able to anticipate which approach would give you the desired effect. If your request yields the desired goal, then you have succeeded in role-taking. Through the role-taking process, cooperative interaction is established. Symbolic interaction theory emphasizes that a person can act not only towards others but also towards his or herself. That is, an individual can engage in self-perception, self-evaluation and self-control, just as he or she might perceive, evaluate and control others. One important component of self is identity, that is, the person understanding of who he or she is. For interaction among persons to proceed smoothly, there must be a consensus with respect to the identity of each person. In other words, for each person, there must be an answer to the question as to who I am in this situation and who are these other people. Only by answering this question in some detail can each person understand one's role and others' expectations. Sometimes a person's identity is very unusual and interaction becomes awkward, difficult or even impossible. For example, if a person who is in a deranged condition, that is mentally unstable or suffering from a psychotic condition like schizophrenia, that person's identity is very unclear to himself. He or she might be suffering from delusions and may think that they are a celebrity or a powerful personality, say like Amitabh Bachchan or the president of the country. Then he or she may think, behave and act in a similar way of the imagined figure. In such a case, conversation with such a person becomes very difficult. In daily life, we may not meet such persons who are suffering from a condition or who are deranged. However, persons with unusual identities can create problems in social interaction, and they make it difficult to achieve consensus. Cooperative action is difficult without such consensus, for people simply do not know how to relate to those individuals. The self occupies a central place in symbolic interaction theory because social order is hypothesized to rest in part on self-control. Individuals strive to maintain self-respect in their own eyes, but because they are continually engaged in role-taking, they see themselves from the viewpoint of others with whom they interact. The persons whose opinions he or she cares most about are called significant others. Typically, significant others are the people who control important rewards or who occupy central positions in groups to which the individual belongs. Because their positive opinions are highly valued, significant others have relatively more influence over the individual's behavior. In conclusion, the symbolic interactionist perspective has several strong points. A person's behavior is constructed through give and take during his or her interaction with others. The perspective views humans as proactive and goal-seeking. It recognizes the importance of the self in social interaction. It also stresses the central role of symbolic communication and language in personality and society. It addresses the process involved in achieving consensus and cooperation. So what are few limitations of symbolic interaction theory? Critiques of symbolic interactionism have pointed out to various shortcomings. One criticism concerns the balance between rationality and emotion. Some critics argue that this perspective overemphasizes rational self-conscious thought and de-emphasizes unconscious or emotional states. A second criticism concerns the model of the individual implicit in symbolic interaction theory. The individual is depicted as a specific personality type or other directed person who is concerned primarily with maintaining self-respect by meeting others' standards. A third criticism of symbolic interactionism is that it places too much emphasis on consensus and cooperation and therefore neglects or downplays the importance of conflict. The perspective does not recognize, however, that interacting people may fail to reach consensus despite their efforts to achieve it. The symbolic interactionist perspective is at its best when analyzing fluid, developing encounters with significant others. It is less useful when analyzing self-interested behavior or principled action. When we think of Charles Darwin and evolution, we most often think of the development of physical characteristics. For example, how did humans develop binocular vision or the ability to walk upright? How did some animals develop an acute sense of smell? Evolutionary social psychologists do not stop with strictly physical characteristics. However, they extend evolutionary ideas to explain a greater deal of social behavior, including altruism, aggression, mate selection, and sexual behavior. Evolutionary foundations of behavior. Evolutionary psychology locates the roots of social behavior in our genes and therefore intimately links psychological and social to the biological. In effect, social behavior or the predisposition towards certain behaviors is encoded in our genetic material and is passed on through reproduction. In physical evolution, these characteristics that enable the individual to survive and pass on its genetic codes are ones that will eventually occur more frequently in the population. Consider one area of research that has received a great deal of attention by evolutionary psychologists, that is, mate selection. Psychologists have observed that men strongly value physical attractiveness and youthful appearance in a potential mate, whereas women focus more on the mate's ability to provide resources for herself and their offspring. Why does this difference occur? From an evolutionary perspective, it must be that the different strategies differentially enable men and women to produce successful offspring. Over a period of time, then, a genetic preference for older women will be eliminated from the population. Men who prefer younger women will reproduce at a much higher rate, and thus this social behavior will dominate men's approach to mating. Women, on the other hand, are less concerned about their mate's age because even much older men can produce offspring. Women's concern about successful reproduction are focused on the resources necessary for a successful pregnancy and for ensuring the proper development of the child. According to a study conducted by Buzz and Kendrick in 1998, says that women's solution to this problem has been to select mates who have the resources and willingness to assist during the pregnancy and afterwards. Women who do not prefer such men or who do not have the ability to identify them will less likely to have successful pregnancy and child-rearing experiences. Therefore, women's preference for resource-providing men will eventually dominate in the population. Using this basic notion of evolutionary selection, evolutionary psychologists have developed explanations for an extremely wide variety of social behaviors. This perspective also helps to explain parenting practices. For example, men tend to be somewhat less invested in parenting than women because they invest less in producing offspring. Another example is adults are more likely to abuse their stepchildren than their biological children. Again, evolutionary psychologists would argue that this difference can be traced to the fact that parents share genetic material with their biological children but not with their stepchildren. So, is evolutionary theory a unifying theory? The evolutionary approach to social psychology is not the same kind of theory as cognitive theory or social exchange theory. Rather than attempting to understand the mechanisms that produce specific kind of social behavior, the evolutionary approach attempts to account for how and why these mechanisms arise in the first place. Evolutionary psychologists believe that this perspective provides a unifying principle that ties together the many theories about social behavior that have a more specific focus. So, what are the limitations of evolutionary theory? Although evolutionary theory may appear to be a far-reaching, unifying engine of human social behavior, it is not without critics. Therefore, although the evolutionary perspective has grown in popularity in recent years, it still has major obstacles to overcome before achieving widespread acceptance as a useful explanation for social behavior.